Hi and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave and this is episode 673. And today's date is May 21st, 2015. And the title of this episode is The Economic Indicators Are Now Showing Signs of a Collapse. For those of you who are wondering why the report was not uploaded until today, the reason for this was because there was a fiber cable that was cut in my area, and it pretty much brought the entire area to its knees where nobody had internet connection whatsoever. And the internet connection stayed down from like 1 in the afternoon all the way to about 3 in the morning. And this is why the report was late. On another note, tomorrow I'm going to upload the Alistair McLeod interview, and if you're on the X22 Report email alert system, you will get that email. If you're subscribed to YouTube on the X22 Report Spotlight channel, you will get an email from YouTube, or you can just come right to the x22report.com site. You will see the interview on the right-hand side, or just go to YouTube and type in X22 Report Spotlight. Now let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that the economy right now is completely falling apart. I mean, we've been tracking these indicators, and we are definitely seeing signs that the U.S. government central bankers cannot continually keep the illusion in front of the people's faces. I mean, everything is starting to crumble apart. I mean, we're starting to see in the housing industry, and we talked about this quite a bit, this is the hot season for homes. The spring, summer months, we're out of that cold winter. People are go out, they look at homes, they want to purchase, but we're really not seeing that. And what we're seeing in the real estate industry is that the existing home sales right now, they have dropped by negative 3.3%, well below the 0.8% rise they were expecting. Basically, it was completely the opposite. And what's very interesting about this, and we've seen this before, where the prices of homes continually rise, which we are seeing in many of the areas where the corporate media is not reporting on, we see that the prices of homes, they are dropping, where actually people are having a problem actually selling their homes. But if we go along with the National Association of Realtors, the corporate media, the U.S. government, they're continually telling us that prices are going up. Yes, they have gone up, but they're topping off and they're starting to fall. And we're seeing that 40% of the properties sold last month went at or above asking price. But what's very interesting about this is that 71% of the investors paid cash to get those homes. So that's very interesting. And when I look around the country, I see in many different areas, and this is how it started in 2007, 2008, where we saw homes just basically on the market. They couldn't be sold. Nobody knew what was going on. Prices started to come down, traffic drying up, and we're starting to see right now, which has been reported, traffic is drying up, and we're in the hot season of real estate. And we have to put this in perspective. If this is a real housing recovery and the economy is doing great, where retail stores are just popping up everywhere, people are just building homes, housing is incredible, why aren't the indicators showing us this? I mean, look at this. They're telling us that new permits, new starts, they've just increased. But why are lumber prices and lumber demand dropping? It makes no sense. Another sign that a real housing recovery is not underway is that actual home ownership has fallen. Owner-occupied housing as a percent of total housing units has fallen. I mean, if we go back to 2006, we were at around 60% or so. Today, where are we? We are down to 55.5%. It has dropped since the height of the market. The home ownership rate. Guess what? This is a disaster. If we're in a recovery, more people would own homes, correct? But we know a lot of these homes that are out in the market, they're ghost homes, where investment companies, hedge funds, and other entities, they're continually purchasing in cash, and nobody is living in them. When we look at this, we can see that we are back to 1980 level of home ownership. This is not a good sign. I mean, back in 2006, at the height of the market, we were at very close to 69.2%. Where are we today? Well, we are at 63.7%. Home ownership rate since that time period, since the height of the market in 2000, has dropped considerably. And this is absolutely terrible. This economy cannot be sustained by this. So what we're seeing right now is lumber prices falling, lumber demand falling, home ownership non-existent. Home ownership and those who are occupying the homes has dropped. We're seeing existing home sales have fallen. And they're continually telling us that everything is fine. And when I look around the country, I am seeing homes on the market longer and longer. And these people are trying to get the top prices. But guess what? Those prices are continually dropping and falling. We see that people are not taking out home mortgages. The Mortgage Banker Association has said once again, the week ending May 15th, that mortgage applications have fallen by 1.5%. We're seeing less and less of the American people going to take out mortgages. Now, unless everyone is wealthy and they have $300,000, $400,000, $700,000, $900,000 on hand to pay for these homes, it tells us that the mortgage industry is not supporting the housing recovery, which means the American people are not purchasing. They're tapped out. They don't have the funds. We also see other economic indicators letting us know that, this is not a recovery. Actually, this is a collapse, which is completely masked by the government with their illusionary statistical numbers. And we see that the Philly Fed fell again in May, printing a disappointing 6.7 against an 8.0 expectation. The Philly Fed has now missed 5 of the last 6 and 7 of the last 9 months. Prices paid plunged at recessionary pace, inventories tumbled, and the average work week slumped. We're seeing the Chicago Fed. The National Activity Indicator printed a disappointing negative 0.15, the 4th month in a row of contraction. We see initial jobless claims, they've ticked up a little bit. But what we can see, what the government normally does, is they leave all the rest of the people off. They revise the numbers, and the next month will show that initial jobless claims have fallen once again, because they don't want to show the layoffs. They don't want to show the people going for unemployment insurance. And we have to remember those people who are working part-time jobs. You cannot apply for this unless you're working a certain number of hours and getting paid a certain number of dollars. If you are not, you cannot apply. And each state is different in that number. And this is why a lot of them are not counted. We see the U.S. government central bankers are completely not looking at the energy layoffs. They don't even recognize it. We see that they're not looking at the corporate layoffs that's going on around the United States right now. And of course, they don't report on that because they canceled that whole entire part of the BLS department where they don't report on layoffs anymore. We see manufacturing here in the United States, but still getting worse. Markets, U.S. manufacturing PMI printed 53.8. They were expecting a 54.5. This is the lowest U.S. manufacturing PMI since January of 2014. And that was during that terrible January winter of 2014. Manufacturers are now reporting this is the weakest growth since the start of May of 2014. So we are just getting worse and worse as time goes on. It's just not getting better. And we can wrap this up to say, yeah, this is all true because guess what? The Baltic Dry Index is now under 600. It has fallen to 592, down another 14 points. And we can see that the Baltic Dry Index is not going anywhere. It's staying at this low level. Now, if we look to last year and the year before, the Baltic Dry Index was around 1,000 points, 1,200 points, 1,400. We are way below because this is the raw material that factories need to produce when there's demand. If there's no demand, guess what? They're not going to produce. They don't need the raw material. And this is what we are seeing. We know the U.S. government is very worried about this student loan bubble at $1.2 trillion because guess what? Most of the college graduates are having a very tough time finding that full-time, high-paying job where they can support themselves and pay for the student loans. A lot of them are now in loan modifications. What they're doing is they're stretching it out. They're deferring their payments. And we see that colleges are closing. Corinthian College has closed. And the Secretary of Education received a group request from 78,000 students requesting loan forgiveness. The real question now is whether continued pressure on for-profit colleges will result in further closures and more petitions from hundreds of thousands of students with tens of billions of loans they now know can be legally discharged. Will the government at this point say, okay, you know what? If you cannot find work, your college closes, or if you graduate from college and you cannot find a work for a certain number of months, you can discharge your loan. You can declare bankruptcy and write it off. I mean, it normally never goes away. But this is what the government wants. They want this because right now, when the system comes crumbling down, there's no bailout for the student loan because at this point in time, nobody can write it off. You always owe this money. If the government can get away with this, and this is what they're proposing, they want people to go bankrupt. They want them to write it off. This way, the taxpayers can bail out the student loan bubble, which will save the economy because they know right now these college graduates who are coming out of college, they can't find work, and they know this is going to be a major, major problem, and they're stuck in this regard. We see the IMF is out there, and they were saying that the Russian economy was going to collapse. It wasn't going anywhere. They're in a deep, deep recession. And now Russia has turned things around, and they're not heading in that direction whatsoever. And we know for a fact with these sanctions, with dropping the oil prices, they were trying to put a lot of pressure on Russia, and it just didn't work. And there was other agendas along with the drop of the oil prices. And we can see the IMF now is saying, well, okay, maybe they're not doing as bad as we thought, and we're looking to see Russia might actually return to growth right now in a mild recovery. It's funny, you look at the United States, they're saying that the United States is doing fine. They're expecting, GDP to be 2.5%, 3%. Right now we're in the negatives, and every quarter now we'd have to be 5% to get where they predicted. Now, of course, if they manipulate the numbers, we can get to that point. But at the way things are going right now, they can never reach that. Actually, the GDP is a complete disaster. It shows we're in a recession. It shows that we're actually really in a collapse scenario. We see Bloomberg is out there, and they are saying if we move to the new Chinese gold standard, because we understand the Shanghai Exchange, where they're basically settling the contracts in physical gold, if we actually go ahead and move to the Chinese gold standard, the exchange rate would be as much as $64,000 an ounce. 50 times of what it is right now. This tells us something. This tells us that the price of gold right now is not realistic the way the U.S. is presenting it, or the COMEX is presenting it. So we can see from what they're saying here that, yes, this is an illusion, and they continually suppress the gold. Even the corporate media is out there saying, yeah, if we go to this real gold exchange, this is what gold would be worth right now. And this is coming out of Bloomberg. So they're actually acknowledging it. And we know eventually China's going to want to do this. Once they're prepared and ready and they have the gold, which I believe they do, because the interview with Alistair McLeod, we discussed this, and he does believe that China does have the gold they need. And if you listen to that interview tomorrow, you'll understand more of what is going on. Now, we see that the everyday United States citizen does not trust the government with their private information. There was a poll taken, and let me tell you, there is absolutely no reason to trust the government with your information. And we could see that according to recent surveys by Pew Research Center, 93% of adults say that being in control of who can get information about them is important, with 74% saying this is very important, and 6% of adults say they are very confident that the government agencies can keep their records private and secure. That means 94% believe that the government cannot keep their records, their private information secure. Well, the government cannot. They should not have most of our private information. And basically, they want more of your private information with the bill they're proposing called CISA. And they're trying to get this passed, and they want companies to hand over your private information. And don't worry, they'll keep it. And if it does leak, the companies are not responsible, and neither is the government. So we can see where this is headed. And we understand that the TPP is being kept a complete secret from the American people. And there are more than 250 tech companies and digital rights organizations on Wednesday which sent a joint letter to Congress blasting the corporate-backed trade deal they say actively silences the voices of internet users, startups, and small tech companies, while undermining the health of the entire web. Some of the companies are AVG, DreamHost, Namecheap, Mediafire, Internet Archive, Boing Boing, and there's about 200 others. They are calling on Congress to come out against the fast track, which gives Obama the authority without working with Congress, basically like a dictatorship. And they're saying that, listen, the secret process under which mammoth trade pacts are negotiated is not good for the people, and there's basically no democracy. This is what we see in a dictatorship. The TPP investment chapter contains text that would enable corporations to sue nations over democratic rules that allegedly harm expected profits. Companies can use this process to undermine U.S. rules like fair use, net neutrality, and other designed to protect the free and open internet and user rights to free expression online. If TPP backers truly believe that they were doing the people's work, they'd have invited the people into the room. And this is coming from Cory Doctorow from Boing Boing. The provisions in the TPP and the secrecy around it should serve as a warning, said author Cory Doctorow, who declared, democracies make their laws in public, not in smoke-filled rooms. And we understand that Obama continually goes to Congress saying, okay, explain to me what's wrong with the TPP specifically. And under this law, where they're not allowed to discuss anything about the TPP, it puts them in a catch-22 situation. And this was designed on purpose because, again, they're trying to keep it a secret because it is not for the people. It is for the corporations. It is for the central bank, and it is for a certain it's for a certain number of elite people. Now, we understand that the CIA has black sites all around the world, and we're starting to realize that, yes, each government in each one of these countries, they kind of knew about the black site because they had to work with the U.S. government, the CIA, other intelligence agencies to form and create this in their country. They just didn't pop up out of nowhere. And we also understand that the CIA does torture these people. Now, you have to remember, these people have not been convicted. There was no trial. There was absolutely nothing. They were stripped of their rights and just tortured. And they were trying to hide the torture by destroying the tapes of the torture. And it's not just waterboarding. There's many other types of torture that is going on here, and they didn't want the American people to see any of this, or the world in that case. And what's being done right here, coming from Jane Mayer of The New Yorker, saying they must have understood that if people saw the tapes, they would consider them to show acts of torture, which is a felony offense. If those videotapes had ever been seen, the reaction around the world would not have been survivable. And they know this because it is a felony. This is not the way the United States works. I'm talking about the people, not the government. The people who believe in this country, who believe in the rights, would never go ahead and just torture someone like this without actually never, but they would, first of all, not keep them imprisoned without any type of due process. And this is why they set up the CIA black sites outside of the U.S., because they're saying, ooh, we're outside of the U.S. We can do this here. So think of their mentality and what they're trying to tell you right now. That if it's not here, we can torture, we don't care about your rights, we can do whatever we want to you. So they don't really care about the rights of individuals. And you can see by what they're doing, if they could get rid of the Bill of Rights here in the United States, they would. And they've been trying for a very long time. Now, out in South Korea, we understand the U.S. is bringing in the THAAD deployment missile system, which is the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Batteries. And they were supposed to be temporary. Okay, we're going to place them here temporarily because of what is going on in North Korea. And we just want to make sure we have this because, North Korea is having these drills. They're testing their ballistic missiles. And we just want to make sure that South Korea is safe. And now the U.S. is out there. A U.S. official is saying that, something? These THAAD missile systems, they need to be permanent in South Korea because of what's going on in China and North Korea. And we know every time they tell us it's going to be temporary, it always turns out to be permanent. Just like when they bring in military assets and they have drills in certain countries, it seems that those assets usually always stay in those countries and they're really never removed. And the troops normally stay there also because they're doing this on purpose to get ready for what is coming. And eventually that is war. China is looking to build the first high-speed rail link to Russia. They want to connect the two countries, and they're pushing forward in doing this. Basically, Russia wants to create a strategic goal, which would be a transit logistic zone in the Far East, and this is why they're doing this at this point. Now, Kiev right now, according to the Kiev government, they're looking to basically remove the Human Rights Act, which is formed by the UN and Ukraine on the Donbass region. They're going to ignore the human rights in Donbass. And basically, Ukraine is exercising its right to regress from the obligations defined in the International Pact on Civilian and Political Rights in certain regions of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine. And they're reneging on the human right obligation under the United Nations Convention, because what they're ready to do is they're ready to go into these regions, and they don't want to have this over their heads where they have to abide by certain rules, because they consider these people in these regions as terrorists, and they're getting ready to treat them like terrorists, and they don't want to abide by any rules and have humanitarian rights. And this is why they completely are reneging on this right now. Poroshenko is out there, and he has declared that his regime right now, which is supported by Washington and the EU, they are at war with Russia. Yeah, Russia. He says, I can be absolutely clear that this is not a fight with Russian-backed separatists, but this is a real war with Russia. He added that he expected renewed fighting in regions of East Ukraine held by pro-Russian separatist forces in the coming days. Poroshenko dismissed speculation that after U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's trip to Moscow last week, relations between Washington and the Kremlin might improve, and that the U.S. government might therefore limit its support to his regime in Kiev. Well, I'm saying these talks in Russia were to see where Russia was standing at this point in time. And we understand that the United States government, central bankers, they're getting ready for a major offensive. Let's put this all into perspective right now. Victoria Nuland basically coordinated the coup d'etat, spent about $5 billion to overthrow the elected president. At this point in time, we know that the snipers were coming from the protester side, shooting at people to make it look like it was coming from the Yanukovych side, which was the elected president, to confuse everyone. Once the coup was done, they lost Crimea, and the southeastern people said, you know something, we would like to be independent too, after Crimea voted to be independent. And we can see that the U.S. bankers then flew into Ukraine, and they stole the gold from Ukraine in the middle of the night. Then they decided that they were going to call those people in the southeastern region terrorists, so they can create an anti-terrorist unit. Biden came in. He places his son on the board of directors. John Kerry came in, places his roommate in the same type of position in the gas companies. U.S. and NATO were using a lot of propaganda that Russia is invading, but they never showed proof. And the proof they did show was completely debunked, that they were altered and old pictures. And we have to understand that all of this propaganda was completely fake, because the U.S. and Ukraine, they've flown over Russia, over Ukraine on the border, using the Open Sky Treaty, and they saw absolutely nothing. But they didn't report on that. An NBC crew drove up and down the border 1,200 miles and never saw armed forces. The U.S. now is spending millions in Ukraine to retake the southeastern section, and it failed 3 times already. And we see that Putin decided to put forth the Minsk I talks, their ceasefire, which, of course, Ukraine didn't abide by. They have the Minsk II ceasefire, where France and Germany were involved. Ukraine was involved. Russia was involved. The United States, no. They were out on the sidelines. They didn't want to get involved with that. Even though they have troops and they've been spending money, they paid for the coup d'etat. They don't want a ceasefire. While this is all happening, Ukraine's economy is completely falling apart. They've collapsed. The value of their currencies collapsed. Their industry, manufacturing collapsed. The country is put into debt. And while the Minsk II ceasefire negotiations were going on, the U.S. passed a bill to supply Ukraine with lethal weapons, a lot of aid money to help them in their fight, defensive weapons. They brought in combat troops and trainers into the country to train their forces. And then we see the U.S. commander out there saying, listen, the troops are not ready. They're a complete mess. So Kerry decides to go off to Russia to talk to Putin, see where he stands, because he's saying that, yeah, eventually what we're going to do is we're going to take back Ukraine. And don't stop us. And they decided, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take Victoria Nuland, who coordinated the coup d'etat, to go in and talk to the Russians about what is coming. To make everyone believe that the United States wants peace now. To make everyone believe that, oh no, we're part of this Minsk II agreement, which no way are they. And we can see they're getting prepared and ready for a major offensive. Poroshenko has not adhered to any of the points on the Minsk II deal. NATO right now is intensifying their propaganda. Of course, they show no proof. They even made the statement and said, listen, Putin, get your troops and your equipment out of Ukraine. And we just can't show you any proof. They have no satellite imagery, no video, no photographs, no documented evidence whatsoever. But they just made that statement on the corporate media. And now Poroshenko is pushing the notion that Ukraine is almost ready to push another offensive. So we can see they are getting ready to make their move. They're setting everything up. We see the United States is provoking China in the Stratly Island area. We see the U.S. is bringing in ships, surveillance aircraft, and China is out there saying that, listen, don't come near this area. We're telling you, just stop what you're doing. You're not a part of this. You have no claims to any of these islands, so you shouldn't even be out here. And which is true. There's no reason for the U.S. to be over there. If another country who has claims to those islands, yes, they could be there. But the U.S. is just out there to provoke, to push, to poke at the person. And I gave this example once before. It's like when you're walking down a hall, and for those people who haven't heard it, I'll tell you one more time here. The bully comes up, pokes you in the hallway once. The next day comes, he pokes you again. Next day comes, he pokes you again. After 7-8 weeks of this, you can't take it anymore. And when he's walking down the hall, you decide, you know what? I'm going to hit him this time because I'm not getting poked. And he comes out swinging and hits the bully. The teachers see this and say, oh my God, he just lashed out of nowhere and hit this kid. I don't know what came over him. They didn't see the lead up to what happened there. And this is what the U.S. is doing in the Pacific. This is what they're doing in the Middle East. This is what they're doing in Eastern Europe. They are poking, waiting for a country to lash out. We see the Iranian ship carrying aid to Yemen has now docked in Djibouti. First, they were turned away and said, listen, we do not want you to dock here whatsoever, but it looks like Djibouti authorities allowed them to come in. And now it's going to be inspected by the UN and the Red Cross, and once it's inspected, it will then go over to Yemen. Of course, the United States government central bankers are making their move where they're saying that, we might have to use military action against this ship, which is absolutely ridiculous because it's humanitarian aid that is on this ship. We see that the P5+1 talks are going forward, and we know that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Israel, they do not want these talks to go forward. They've been trying to stop it all along. And what is the U.S. government central bankers going to do now to stop them and to keep them happy? They're going to pay them off. The Pentagon has announced a new multi-billion-dollar arms contract with Israel and Saudi Arabia. It's a $1.9 billion deal with Israel, and they're going to get like 3,000 Hellfire precision missiles, 250 AIM-120C advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles, 4,100 GBU 39 small-diameter bombs. They're going to get the 50 BLU-113 bunker buster bombs. We see Saudi Arabia is going to be getting helicopters. And all of this is a complete payoff. And if the P5+1 does go south, they are ready and armed and ready to go into Iran. Because you have to remember, Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. This was all propaganda for the last 35 years. We see the Pentagon now is sending between 1,000 and 2,000 anti-tank missiles to Iraq, because what has happened here is the people inside Iraq have risen up. They're taking over their cities. They're basically capturing the weapons of the U.S. forces and the Iraqi forces, and now they're in total control. So they're sending over anti-tank missiles because the people have captured tanks, which were left behind. And of course, they sprinkle in the Islamic State, saying, oh, this was the town that was being held by the Islamic State. But no, again, the Islamic State is a small group. Most of the Islamic State, which is really the Free Syrian Army, inside Syria, and a little bit is sprinkled into Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, and Yemen to get those photo shoots to make it look like, yeah, the Islamic State is there. And basically, they have about 20, 25 people. They wave some flags, they take some shots, and it's to convince us that they're in these countries. And we can see in all these countries, basically, the people are rising up. We see that the Islamic State, or / the Free Syrian Army, which is the proxy army for the United States government, they have now taken over another city in Syria. Basically, they control half of Syria right now. And they're moving towards the east, towards Damascus. They started out in the west, they captured all these areas, and they're slowly moving towards Damascus. And we can see they want to make this a safe haven, and basically the U.S. and the coalition forces, they are the air force for the Islamic State / Free Syrian Army. And we can see they're pushing the propaganda once again that Syria is using chemical weapons, chlorine weapons. They're trying to bring it up to the UN. They're saying that he's using barrel bombs on civilians. Why would they do that? Why would he hurt his own people? It makes no sense. They're using all this to convince everyone that it's almost time to go in to Syria with boots on the ground from U.S. forces to take Assad out. Now, they're going to try it with the Islamic State and the Free Syrian Army first, and they're going to hit Damascus and that area very, very hard until they have the entire country. And they're pushing this as hard as they possibly can. Obama was out there. He's saying that climate change is responsible for the Islamic State and terrorism around the world, like Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda. And this is why we're seeing it, because in Syria, because of drought and crop failures and high food prices, this helped fuel the civil war in Syria. This is what he's really trying to convince people, that human-caused global warming, which is non-existent, which is made up by the U.S. government central bankers, was the cause of what's going on in Syria, what's going on with the Islamic State. No, this is the U.S. government who's doing all. It has nothing to do with any type of global warming or anything like that. But they're out there pushing everything they possibly can, and we can see as we're moving into the summer, they're going to try to push another tax, because when we see the countries completely falling apart and collapsing, what the governments do is they add more and more taxes, because they're trying to get revenue into the government to sustain what they have. This is why we see FATCA. This is why we see Obamacare. This is why we see a carbon tax coming. And we might see martial law in here. This is coming out of Activist Post, where they're saying, is martial law justified if the Islamic State attacks? Now, we've seen a false flag event already in Texas with the Islamic State, and we know we're going to see a lot more of this, and this would be very easy to say. We need to declare martial law. I mean, think about this. A group of foreign militants infiltrates the U.S. using student visas. We have weak borders because they're just letting anyone over. And we know that these people coming over, they're not really the Islamic State. They are paid mercenaries controlled by the U.S. government to rain down terror here in the United States. A lot of them are already set up, waiting for the green light for the go-ahead. We see that secret cells will then integrate into the metropolitan areas and blend in with the populace, which I believe has already been done. And at the precise moment, they activate, unleashing small attacks across the country. And basically, when we see all these attacks, like on public schools, shopping malls, in all different areas. This will strike fear in the citizens. And of course, the government will come out and say this is not safe for the people. No one is safe. And we need to declare martial law. We need curfews. We need military on the ground. We need to control the situation. I'm going to tell you how to control the situation. Everyone should buy a weapon. If you see the Islamic State, if you don't feel safe, have a weapon. If every single person had a weapon, we wouldn't have to worry, would we? But they don't mention that part. They leave that completely out. And they might do this, which they can declare martial law. They would remove our rights. And we can see this would then have a domino effect into other type of false flag events to cover up the economic collapse and get us into war. And you can see where this could be headed, because they have it all planned and ready to go. They're just waiting for that right moment. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.